Today, Bitcoin holds its ground above $110,000, and Bitcoin 2025 kicks off in Las Vegas, Nevada. We talked to Matthew Sigel of VanEck about this year's event and the latest moves for Bitcoin's price. Welcome to CNBC's Crypto World. I'm Matthew Sigel, on the ground in Las Vegas for Bitcoin 2025. We'll get back to this event in just a moment, but first let's get a check on prices. Cryptocurrencies are back in the green today after last week's new record high for Bitcoin. As of noon Eastern, that cryptocurrency held steady above $110,000, while Ether climbed above $2,600. Plus, XRP was little changed at $234. Okay, let's also catch you up on some headlines you should know about. Shares of Trump Media falling this morning after the company announced plans to buy more than $2 billion in Bitcoin. The company said it plans to issue $1.5 billion in common stock and another $1 billion in convertible notes to bankroll the purchase of the cryptocurrency, which will be held across Anchorage Digital and Crypto.com, the latter of which also recently helped DJT launch ETFs. Now, the announcement comes just after Bitcoin touched that new record high, but the company's stock hasn't fared quite as well. It was down more than 7.5% at noon Eastern. Next, multiple people have been arrested after an alleged kidnapping scheme with crypto ties. According to New York NBC affiliate WNBC, a 28-year-old Italian citizen was allegedly held in a New York townhouse for several days as two of his business partners tried to gain access to his crypto wallet. Now, on Friday, one of those partners, John Waltz, was charged with kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, assault, and criminal possession of a firearm. He pleaded not guilty to the charges. And then this morning, WNBC also reports that the other business partner, William Duplessis, surrendered to NYPD. Attorneys for both Waltz and Duplessis declined to comment to NBC. All right, let's turn our attention back to Bitcoin 2025 for our main story. We're on the ground here in Las Vegas for day one of the conference, which made a splash last year when then-candidate Donald Trump spoke directly to the Bitcoin community, promising to make Bitcoin a major focus if he won the presidency. Well, nearly a year later, he did win, and he's made good on some of those promises, like a strategic Bitcoin stockpile and pushing lawmakers for crypto regulation. Now, this year, Bitcoiners are looking to hear what's next for the Trump administration, as Vice President J.D. Vance is set to take the stage tomorrow. As for Crypto World, we'll be talking to White House official Bill Hines. We'll also hear from Robinhood CEO Vlad Tenev and a whole lot more. Now, to kick off the conference, Crypto World's Talia Kaplan spoke to Matthew Sigel, head of digital assets research at VanEck, for his take on this year's event and the latest Bitcoin price moves.
We're here at Bitcoin 2025, a lot of excitement in the air, especially because Bitcoin hit a new record last week, just under $112,000. We also saw regulatory advancements for crypto, with the Senate advancing the Genius Act regulation stablecoin bill. What does all of that signal to you, and how does this year compare to years past? I know you said you have attended for the past 5 years this Bitcoin conference, so how does this year compare to the other conferences in the past?
Bitcoin is becoming a mainstream asset, and the difference this year is the participation from listed corporates, so MicroStrategy and its copycats, who are really the equity capital markets right now are wide open for crypto strategies, and that's been the hottest part of the market. And then the second category is government. We're going to hear from J.D. Vance. There was a big announcement yesterday from Pakistan, who's now going to allocate 2 gigawatts of power towards setting up some national Bitcoin mining efforts, and I think that's the leading edge, right? So this asset class is transitioning from a retail dominant asset class into something that is accepted by institutions, and institutions include both listed corporates and governments.
I want to focus on Bitcoin's price because, as I mentioned, we saw that record, a new record for Bitcoin hit last week, just under $112,000. You were on CNBC 6 months ago, right after the presidential election, and at the time, you said that Bitcoin's rally was just getting started and that it wasn't going to be a straight line. Sure enough, you were right so far. But what do you think propelled Bitcoin to that new record? What are some of the catalysts? Of course, we saw easing tensions between the US and China, so I'm sure that's a factor, but what other factors are in the equation?
Yeah, so last year the story was about funds buying, like our own Bitcoin ETF and the 10 similar projects that launched, gathering flows from both individuals and financial advisors. This year, the biggest buyer of Bitcoin has been these corporates who are raising equity in the public markets in order to fund Bitcoin's treasury strategies. So we used to wonder whether every corporation might put 2 or 3% of their balance sheet into Bitcoin in order to outperform the S&P 500. Now it looks like a handful of companies that are putting 100% of their assets into Bitcoin. Maybe they're going to end up buying the S&P 500 if this continues.
So what do you think it will take to keep this momentum going? I know when you spoke with CNBC about 6 months ago, you mentioned that VanEck's price target for Bitcoin is $180,000 by 2026. Are you still optimistic that will happen? And if so, what will it take?
Well, if we zoom out, okay, Bitcoin has outperformed the NASDAQ over 1 day, 1 month, 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, 10 years since inception. So there is a long track record here of outperformance. And from our perspective, it's the demographics. It's baked in the cake. The haters like Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett, they are retiring. The new workforce joining the labor force, they are open to Bitcoin. So as the olds die off and the next generation takes over, the mathematics of that is pretty powerful towards greater adoption of the asset class. So we're still pretty optimistic.
Good to know. And this has been a slower than usual rally for Bitcoin. As you mentioned, it was fueled by institutional ownership of the cryptocurrency and corporate adoption of it. And you actually put out a note earlier this month on the investment case for the on-chain economy, where you noted that institutions are in fact getting more involved in crypto. You mentioned it again today. And you wrote that since early 2020, the value of Bitcoin held by public companies has skyrocketed from under $400 million to more than $56 billion. And that doesn't even include exchange-traded products and crypto-focused funds. So what do you attribute that to?
One of the most remarkable stats in the last month is Bitcoin's volatility is now lower than gold. So, that gold is the OG safe haven asset, and now Bitcoin volatility is below gold. That really justifies larger position sizes for some of these institutions. When I talk to financial advisors and other institutions, the biggest pushback I get is around the volatility. People often believe in the space, believe in the future, but they don't want to suffer through these 80% drawdowns. And I think that the decoupling that we've had over the last 6 weeks since the tariff announcements has legitimized Bitcoin for many investors who wanted it to be a safe asset. And with the volatility lower, they can now justify to their clients a larger position size.
So Bitcoin ETFs have seen strong and steady inflows. VanEck offers a spot Bitcoin ETF, I believe, with $1.6 billion in total net assets at last check. What has changed for these inflows for spot Bitcoin ETFs under a more crypto-friendly political backdrop? And especially, I'm curious to know from your vantage point, what has changed for VanEck's Bitcoin ETF?
It's really about the inbound phone calls and the receptiveness of advisors to entertain an investment. So I was on a conference call recently with 400 advisors, and we did a poll. How many of them own Bitcoin for their clients? It was less than 50%. So the 0 to 1 moment is still ahead of us in terms of adoption. And what I've found post the election is advisors who previously did not entertain are now willing to have a conversation. And that makes us obviously optimistic about what comes next, which is usually a buy ticket.
Now, last June, VanEck filed to list the first U.S. ETF tied to the spot price of Solana's SOL token. Right now, no update as it relates to that application with the SEC, but I'm wondering, what's the very latest? What have you heard? And are you still optimistic we'll see a spot Solana ETF in the U.S. sometime this year?
I do think that we'll have a Solana ETF by the end of the year. The SEC, under the new leadership of Hester Pierce, has been very proactive in putting out the list of unanswered questions to the investment management community and other stakeholders to get input on how best to manage these products operationally. There's still one key missing ingredient, which is the IRS. So the IRS has to give some guidance around the tax treatment of staking specifically, because under the current rules, there's some concerns that the staking and unstaking of a Solana or an Ethereum ETF could constitute active management, which would blow up some of the grantor trust tax status of these ETFs. And the IRS is not part of the crypto task force. So that's a piece of information that's still missing. We're hopeful that the Treasury, since the IRS is under the Treasury and Secretary of the Treasury Bessent has been very vocal about a pro-Bitcoin and pro-crypto environment, that we'll get that information. But that's really the missing link, is how to maintain some of the favorable tax treatment of these ETFs while staking and unstaking a product like a spot Solana ETF.
Okay, that's all for Crypto World today. We'll be back again tomorrow, and we'll see you then.